perpetual hype, we can all agree it's garbage. It's rushing from one novelty to the next, never taking the time to truly savor the game you're playing. And yet, every now and then, hype can be beneficial, even enjoyable. So today I want to explain why I believe getting hyped for certain games is a good thing. And to support my point, we're going to talk about physical relationships later on. Let's dive in. I often hear, my technique is to never get hyped anymore, to have zero expectations, that way I'm never disappointed. And it's true, these people are never disappointed, at least as long as they truly never get hyped. And I tend to think many of them secretly despise their own hype, but that's another discussion. What these people forget to mention is that never getting hyped also means never being truly captivated. Sure, there will still be surprises, sometimes even incredible ones. And why not? That's great. But even the best surprise, even the most mind-blowing discovery, will never match the pleasure of experiencing a game you've waited years for and seeing it live up to your expectations. It's the meeting point between anticipation and satisfaction. I recently had an example outside of video games, but I want to talk about it. I absolutely loved Frieren. It's one of the best anime I've ever watched. I've already seen the first season 4 times and I'm considering watching it a 5th. But as amazing as this discovery was, as wonderful as that surprise felt, it doesn't compare to the first time I watched the conclusion of Attack on Titan, a finale I had been anticipating for years. Of course, when you chase hype, you often chase disappointment. If you don't apply any selection criteria and let every flashy trailer get you hyped, then yes, you'll be disappointed. And not just once, but over and over again. But getting hyped once in a while for a game that stands out, one that's more promising than the average, better teased, developed by people with a proven track record of excellence, that's measured. Because if the game lives up to expectations, your experience will be amplified tenfold. A game is never just a game. How you approach it, the way you experience it, your attitude towards it, these matter just as much as the game itself. It's so easy to ruin great games with the wrong mindset, just as it's possible to turn mediocre ones into an absolute blast with the right attitude, and ideally, the right company. Naturally, if you're truly devoid of hype, you'll never be disappointed. But if a new game you weren't expecting turns out to be amazing, living up to its promises and ambitions, know that you will never experience it the way those who were hyped for it will. Or at the very least, the chances are drastically reduced. So the question is, are you willing to take that risk for a game? Because there's joy in anticipation. But are you willing to risk disappointment? Obviously, the higher the hype, the harder the fall if the game disappoints. But frankly, I usually don't care. First, because that's the deal. Without the risk of potential disappointment, there's no chance for extraordinary satisfaction, only surprises. But more importantly, because there's real pleasure in waiting, in anticipation. And that brings us to physical relationships. If you've ever been with someone, or at least spent time regularly with someone, you know what I mean. Just the act of anticipating, of imagining a reunion for instance, is already a pleasurable experience. It stimulates the imagination, sparks new ideas, and even gives us extra motivation to move forward. Georges Clemenceau once said, "The best moment in love is when you climb the stairs." And I must say, I understand. Because anticipation, provided we're anticipating something worthwhile, is the infinity of possibilities without consequence, without risk. For once, infinity doesn't paralyze us. It's imagination taking over reality, and ultimately inspiring it. But the key to this? What we call hype. It's like Christmas presents. And forgive me for the shift in example, but it's actually very similar. For me, and I'm sure for most, anticipating the gifts always left a stronger mark than the gifts themselves when I was a kid, especially when I already knew what the gift was. Take Assassin's Creed 1 for example. I remember the context vividly. The game case, bought in advance but not yet wrapped, sat on a high shelf above the coat racks. Too high for me to reach, so I had to jump to grab it. And I did, again and again just to decipher the back cover for the 25th time, searching for new clues I might have missed before putting it back, which of course never happened. I never found anything new, I had already seen everything. And yet I did this twice a day for at least, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 days. But each time I etched that game case deeper into my mind. My anticipation only grew, and so did the pleasure that came with it. It turned out that Assassin's Creed 1 lived up to my hype, making the memory of it indelible, both the memory of the game and the anticipation that preceded it, and yep, I was way too young to play this title, but, you know, PG-18 is just marketing disguised as a restriction. Now that I think about it, I've rarely, if ever, met someone who became jaded from getting too hyped. I have seen people miss out on their games by constantly chasing hype. That's why I think it's a flawed approach. But those who truly embrace their hype and appreciate the wait, they know how to move on if they're disappointed. In fact, I get the impression that it's the people who never get hyped who tend to feel jaded. Or maybe, conversely, being jaded prevents them from ever letting themselves get hyped. They experience neither real highs nor real lows. And that's why hype can be a good thing. The last game I was truly hyped for was Starfield, even though I never actually launched it. Yet the memory of the anticipation remains pleasant. More recently, I let myself get hyped for Elden Ring before finally, and belatedly, deciding to play it 3 years later. And in that case, the discovery is more than worth it. Elden Ring is such a blast. So in the end, as long as we choose our games carefully, moderate the frequency of our hype, and decide when to embrace it rather than being swept away by it, then hype can be a good thing. Because as Clemenceau meant earlier, pleasure also lies in anticipation.